Hey there. If you're a frequent listener to our show, you already know that our show is brought to you by our friends over at Artillery Sports. But what you may not know is that Artillery Sports helps athletes of all types win on and off the course and court. They do this by selling quality, durable, and precision manufactured sports equipment that keeps you in the game, while also using a portion of the profits to provide the funding needed to care for our nation's veterans. With Artillery Sports, it's more than just a game. So head over to artillerysports.com today to buy the quality equipment you need to keep you in the game and to help our nation's veterans at the same time. That's artillerysports.com. Make sure you head on over there today. Oh, and use the code DOCFIRST to get 10% off your first order. Welcome to Documentary First, an inside look at documentary filmmaking. I'm your host, Christian Taylor, and a documentary filmmaker myself. I'm recording this podcast today on February 20th, 2025, and if you're a regular listener, you'll know this feature of our podcast where I share the date we are recording is new, but I feel we're in a new world since January 21st, 2025, and I want to give a little context for our discussion today. Today, I am joined by two amazing women, Abby Ginzberg and Christy Carpenter. So sorry, ladies, welcome. So nice to have you here. These ladies have created an incredible documentary that I am delighted to introduce to you guys today. It's called Shaking It Up, The Life and Times of Liz Carpenter. And it is a powerful documentary, in my opinion, about a lady who was a trailblazer. In fact, I was saying earlier, and absolutely very emotionally, that this woman, I feel she really blazed a trail for me. Because she was just a mover and a shaker in Washington, D.C. for the women that were in media. And one of the women that she worked with was Helen Thomas. And Helen Thomas was one of my idols when I was in media and broadcasting in Washington, D.C. and trying to make it there as a young woman in a male world. Because in the early 1980s, that's exactly what it still was. So I really very much looked up to Liz as I was learning about her life. And I didn't even know about her. So thank you, ladies, for making this film, and welcome to Documentary First.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
And Abby, I just want to say, Abby, you are a trooper. She is right now in Hanoi, in Vietnam, right?
I am.
Yeah, yes. And it's 12:30 p.m., right?
12:45, 11:45. Not quite
11:45. Oh my goodness gracious. Well, thank you so much for being a trooper and being here with us. I know you must care about this film a lot. To be able to be here and talk about it. We are here talking about this as it's about to be released on PBS, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's exciting. Congratulations for that. That is a big accomplishment.
Yes, it's going to be on, we hope, lots and lots. There are still, the scheduling decisions are still being made by stations, but it's an a la carte choice for them. And we're getting fantastic pickup around the country for the documentary. So we're excited on March for Women's History Month.
That's wonderful. All right. Well, let me read a little bit before we get into deeply. I want to read a little bit about the film and about who you ladies are. Just give a little bit about your background, and then we'll dive in and let you introduce yourselves. All right. So, founded by film co-directors and co-producers Christy Carpenter and Abby Ginzberg, Liz Carpenter Film Partners was created for the purpose of developing the documentary film Shaking It Up, The Life and Times of Liz Carpenter. The collaboration brought together two passionate minds with unique skill sets to tell the story of a Texas trailblazer, key aide to President Lyndon Baines Johnson and Lady Bird Johnson, journalist and women's rights activist Liz Carpenter. Co-director, co-producer Christy Carpenter is the daughter of Liz Carpenter. She has devoted several years to reviewing the voluminous papers, oral histories, and video materials of her pack rat mother, augmenting her own personal memories. Her very deep knowledge of her mother's life, friends, and former colleagues, as well as her media savvy and passion for history, offer an exceptional resource for this film. Prior to undertaking research on her mother's papers, Carpenter served in New York City as the EVP and COO of the Paley Center for Media, the premier institution dedicated to advancing the understanding of media, its artistic value, business dynamics, historical importance, and social and cultural impact. Sounds amazing. I didn't even know about that, but now I want to know more. Additionally, she served as the CEO of the Winthrop Rockefeller Institute, a center for thought leadership on significant state, national, and international issues. Sounds like you combined both of your mother's passions in your career. That's pretty amazing. Co-producer and co-director Abby Ginzberg, a Peabody Award-winning director and Emmy Silver Circle inductee, congratulations about those, has been producing compelling documentaries about race and social justice for over 35 years. Honored with induction into the Silver Circle of the National Association of Television Arts and Sciences, in recognition of her 25 years of commitment to the film and TV community, Abby has created an impressive portfolio of award-winning films. Her film, Barbara Lee Speaking Truth to Power, won the 2022 NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Documentary and is available on Amazon Prime, which I cannot wait to watch. And now we don't even need to get to documentary Deja Vu in order to have a recommended film. We'll have to put that in our links. So that's just amazing. And now to learn more, everybody, you can go to visitlizcarpenterfilm.com. We'll put that in our show notes. But anyway, everybody, we have two powerhouse ladies here, and we're going to put links for all of the places that they worked in our show notes as well. But here, I want them to just unpack a little bit about who they are and what they did. And Abby, I would like to start with you. Please tell us a little bit about your amazing work in film, how you started. And I mean, it just sounds like, it's incredible. It sounds like you're a trailblazer yourself. So how did you get started in this crazy business?
Okay, so one thing that's similar about both me and Christy and I is that we both went to law school and then didn't really practice. We're old enough that in those days there were not a lot of, broadcast journalism was not in my mind. I mean, Christy might have had it in hers, but it wasn't in my mind, and they didn't really have courses in documentary filmmaking. So literally, I went to law school because I couldn't do science and I couldn't go to medical school, and I wasn't interested in business. So I went to law school, and about 10 years after I graduated, and I had taught and practiced criminal defense law and also practiced some occupational safety and health law, I really felt like I needed a new career. I was like, okay, I did this for 10 years. This is good. I'm glad I did it. Now what am I going to do? And there was some way in which, because I had done jury trials and was very sort of attached to storytelling as a part of sort of being a lawyer, that I just moved over to telling stories. I actually started making training films for workers. That was my first sort of gig. And I did that for a couple of years. And again, the bar was very low because workers hated to have to watch training films that were boring and didactic and whatever. So if you added a little humor and you hired interesting people to maybe be the actors, you could actually get people's attention. So I got started, as I say, just all I had to do was make people be able to stay awake, and I was golden. And then I moved into documentary filmmaking. And as a documentary filmmaker, either stories came to me and it became clear I would be a good person to tell a certain story, or I went out looking for them and found them. And throughout my entire career, there's been a connection to this early life as a lawyer, because many of the people whose stories I've chosen to tell, I got to meet when I was a lawyer. So if I tell the story of a really interesting, African-American jurist, but who happened to be the first Black attorney in the civil rights movement, in the civil rights department of the Department of Justice, I met him when I was a lawyer. And so if you look at my resume, you'll see a lot of lawyers and judges who I thought their stories inspired me, and I thought they could inspire others. And so what I would say is that there's kind of a direct line from the people whose stories I've told before to Liz Carpenter, whose story was inspirational for me, even though I knew her. She was an inspiration. And I thought, what I had learned as a documentary filmmaker, combined with what Christy knew as her daughter and her archivist, we could really do something quite profound. So that's what, there's a direct line from the other work I've done to this film. And I would say it was actually an honor to have the chance to tell Liz's story. I'm really glad that we did. And, and we're sharing. I mean, one other thing I would say is that often the people whose stories I tell are below the radar. They tend to be working with part of, organizations and people that you have heard of. I mean, Thornton Henderson, my black judge, had a whole story about Martin Luther King. Liz has an amazing story about her connections to the Johnsons and others, but her name is not a household word. And so that's part of our goal here is to, shine a spotlight on this woman that's not a household name and hope that more and more people will be inspired by her.
That's one of my favorite things to do too, is to tell untold stories and lift up those voices that would otherwise not be heard. It's just a beautiful thing that you're doing for sure. Now you definitely have a gift, obviously, of doing that because you've been awarded these amazing awards. Talk to me about what you think makes your work different and why have you been honored? Is it your storytelling, your different way of viewing things? Talk to me about that.
I mean, I'd say in part I've been lucky. And no, and that's not entirely true. In part, I've made good choices about the people. Okay, I don't want to not be frozen here. About the people whose stories I'm telling. My thing is going. Okay, so I won a Peabody Award for a film I did on a South African anti-apartheid activist lawyer and judge. And I mean, again, nobody else was going to make a film about Albie Sachs at the time that I did it, which was in 2014. He has subsequently become part of many other documentaries. But when I chose to tell his full story, nobody had ever heard of him outside of South Africa and a handful of people in the United States. So I think that the reason that that film was, acknowledged with the Peabody is because his story was amazing. People hadn't heard of him and we did a competent job of telling it. So I think that's kind of, what I mean? There was nothing exceptional about it other than really the choice to tell his story. And what an amazing story it was. Let me just say something about him, which is he was a guy who was part of the anti-apartheid movement living in Mozambique, and he was blown up in a targeted attack by the South African security forces. And he lost an arm in the sight of an eye and managed to survive. That was amazing. And he survived, and he's still alive today as one of the oldest members of the ANC, who's still with us and still trying to teach us the lessons
Wow.
that Mandela wanted us to know. So but again, I think you get honored when you pick a good subject and you tell the story well. And I think that's sort of the goal I've had for every film. I always have a reason for why I'm picking somebody to tell their story or why I'm picking a subject that I think needs to be told. And, and then our job as the filmmaker is to tell it as well as you can.
Yeah, what I heard you say was what stood out to me in this was that award came you feel based on story, subject, and timing.
And craft.
The
And I
timings
love craft and the craft. It
and craft.
requires a certain amount of craft so that every good film is inevitably dependent on whoever did the shooting, the filming, the editing, the music, and the graphics. I mean, those are the elements of what what
Right.
makes a good film. And so if you've got a good team or good people that fill each of those roles, your film's going to look good and it's going
Yeah.
to sound good
Yeah.
and the music's going to work. And so that's a big piece of what we try to do with every film is try to put together a strong team so that what ends up on the screen is pleasant to watch and interesting to listen to and so on.
Yeah, you made a good stew. Well, that's wonderful words of wisdom for the people that are listening to this podcast right now. So thank you for sharing that. Now, you mentioned that you knew Liz Carpenter. So talk to us about how you knew Liz. And clearly, if you knew Liz, that meant that you knew Christy. So that will lead us into how you and Christy came together. And then I do want to know that. And then I'd like to know a little bit more about Christy. So take us into that.
Okay, so Christy and I have known each other since we were housemates in London in 1969. And I met Liz. I think I met her there, and then I've met her several times after that, whenever we were all in the same state. Because Liz lived in Austin and Christy lived sometimes in California. Anyway, when we were all together, we would get together. And that's how I met her. And what I want to say about Liz that was sort of remarkable in my life is that although many of my friends had working mothers, none of my friends had a mother like Liz Carpenter, who was as accomplished, as much of a trailblazer as she was. I mean, many women in my life as I was growing up, the mothers worked, but they didn't work like Liz Carpenter worked in the White House as a right-hand person to both Lady Bird and Lyndon. That was not an experience I had had anywhere else. And so I really admired that because there weren't very many role models for me. I mean, graduating from college in 1971, graduating from law school in 1975, it was like, wow, think about somebody who graduated from college in 1941 so it changed my mindset a little bit, I think, meeting Liz, and I think it really imprinted on me. And so I'm going to let Christy tell the story of how we came together, but the fact is we've known each other well and for many, many years, before we ever collaborated on a piece of work like this. So Christy, take it away.
That's wonderful. All right, Christy, it's your turn. All right, lovely. Before we I tell you what, let's jump into that real quick, but then I want to learn more about you. So tell us how, you did meet. She said you were in London and you were housemates. So how did that come about?
Well, we both, she was at Cornell and I was studying at Brown, and we both, just not knowing each other, we both decided we wanted to do a junior year at the London School of Economics. And so, we met right at the beginning. I had been, my mother and I actually was with my mother, had been in Europe right when I got the letter saying I'd been accepted at the LSE. And so my mother and I were heading back to London anyway. So we ran around and found an apartment. I mean, it was a house, but a basement and an upper level of a house. And so I needed roommates because it wasn't going to work financially if I didn't have flatmates, as they're called. And so got connected to Abby, and she moved on in with him. We had two other girls, and that was the beginning of everything. And I'll just say, one of the first things we did that year was go to a demonstration in front of the U.S. Embassy, where every American student was protesting the Vietnam War. And who was there but Bill Clinton, who was doing the second year of his Rhodes Scholarship. So we also got to know Bill Clinton, who on occasion would sleep on our living room floor. So anyway, but I digress just to give you a piece of color.
Yes, that's fantastic. That was pretty fun.
Yeah. So in terms of the film coming about, in 2020, it was September 1st was my mother's 100th birthday. And she was born 5 days after the adoption of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. And so it was the centennial of the amendment, her 100th birthday. So I wrote an article. I sent it to Abby, among other people. And Abby read it and called me and said, I think I'd like to do a documentary about your mom. And I had just come off several years of going through my mother's extremely voluminous papers. As you said before, she was a complete pack rat. And so
why would you not be when you have a life like your mom? I mean, like I said, I worked in Washington as well. And every time you have an event, there is a photographer there, and they're taking photos, and there's all these, and I mean, if you're there as long as she is, and you have all of these, things that they give you, you're going to have a lot of stuff, and that's important stuff.
Yeah, well, she started early. A lot of the stuff, some of these boxes are full of college things. She didn't know she was going to be famous. She had an aspiration to make her mark in the world, but
she was meeting LBJ when she was 22. Now, come on. I mean, he was in politics, I guess, and it said in the 10th congressional district.
Yes,
right?
Which was Austin, which was her hometown, and where she went to the University of Texas. So, but anyway, she was stuffing stuff away from the beginning. This was just a natural impulse she had.
That's just crazy.
And so, anyhow, I come through just lots and lots of stuff, finding all kinds of treasures. And so I was thinking that because I like to write, so I was thinking that I might write a book, and I may still do that. But when Abby called and said, like, do a documentary, I thought, great, this will be this will be a good way to tell her story, because she was a colorful, larger than life personality. And
For
I
sure.
knew from the material I was going through and taking copious notes, a lot of times I would know when an interview was done or what, where she was on a certain occasion when there was likely to be news footage. So when it came time to task our archival producer um, with the chore of going out and finding as much material on Liz as she could find. I was able to provide her with a lot of leads. Plus, I had found copies of old videotapes and things as well. So that helped us get off the ground. Yeah.
Now, you're skipping ahead a little bit. Can we go back? And I'd like to learn a little bit about you. So, I'd like to meet you and learn about your impressive history. So, you, in your own right, following your mom, just looks like you made an amazing career for yourself. So, she said you went to law school as well. Clearly, you went to the London School of Economics. So, tell me a little bit about you.
Yeah, well, so I grew up in Washington, D.C., because my parents both came to Washington in the 1940s and in the early 1940s and ended up getting married. They were both from Austin, knew each other in high school and so forth. But so I was born in Washington and grew up there. I never lived in Texas until the last 12 years. So, but anyway, it was a completely politically minded household. There was one conversation, and that was politics. And my parents were very busy people who practiced journalism together until my mother went to work in the White House. And I was surrounded a lot of times because my parents would have a lot of parties and they'd take me places. So I got to, I was around a lot of politicians and high level people in the executive branch and so forth, and judges even on occasion, diplomatic corps, the usual Washington mix of people. And so I was steeped in that arena. So when I got out of college, graduated from Brown University, I went to law school because I thought that I wanted to spend my career doing public policy in Washington. And that's the baseline credential you have to have. You really have to have a law degree in Washington. And if you're going to do anything like that. And particularly as a young woman at that time, you weren't going to be taken seriously unless you had a graduate degree. I mean, you're going to be given the secretarial shift, if if you didn't have more in the way of credentials. So I did do that for several years, and then got very interested in new media technologies, cable television, and then Warner Communications created the first cable system. The first interactive cable system called Cube. And that really fired my imagination, the notion that you could communicate back, not just be a recipient of information through the television screen. So I went to work for them. I went on to work on several other iterations of interactive services while they were developing. And then went into communications in kind of a different mode, first in public relations, and then handling communications for several different trade associations. One of which, two of which were in California. So I moved to San Francisco, which is where Abby was.
Ah,
And
okay, okay.
yeah. And then, anyway, long story. I'm trying to keep the story short because I have a motley resume here, but I ended up getting a job opportunity to join the Paley Center for Media a number of years later, and that was just perfect for me because it was media. And the other piece of my upbringing was I was surrounded by journalists and people in the media, so that was another thread of my upbringing that found its way into my career. So I put on all kinds of, when I left, we were putting on 400 forums a year on different aspects of media between the Beverly Hills location and the Manhattan location. So that was, that's kind of that kind of takes me to virtually the tail end of my career.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of like you guys were a match made in heaven for this film, and really you were destined to do this. And it sounds like really the groundwork was laid out by the time that Abby said, "I'm ready to do this. Let's make this film." Uh, Go ahead, Abby.
I just want to say one thing. Christy said, I'm writing a book about my mother. And I thought, oh no, oh no. Liz has been on, she's been filmed too many times. She's too funny. We need to put her up on the screen. Then you can put her in a book later. So
Yeah,
that was really my feeling, was that this was, her personality lent itself to wanting to be shared.
it did.
So that was my
Well,
contribution to let's make a movie.
yeah, I think you made a great call because you can write a book for sure. And I definitely think you should, because there is so much information that I know did not get in the film. And I'd like to get into that in a little bit, because I know it, we talk about in filmmaking about, killing your babies when you make a film and trying to cut things down. And I'm sure there were a lot of things that didn't get into this film. But, I'm sure there's so many stories that you could have included, but that can go in a book. So Abby, talk to me a little bit about, when you called her and she said, I'm writing a book, and you're like, well, no, let's make a movie.
I don't know that I really, that it was a fully formed concept yet. But once we started talking about it, I could see the film, as long as we could get our hands on the video interviews with Liz. Because the big goal that we both had was, can we, lean into Liz telling as much of her story as possible? And we were able to. I mean, I think it's one of the strengths of the film, is that you really end up getting to know her, and her
funniness. And
I mean, her strength.
And I knew that the main theme was Liz as a trailblazer. And I knew it should, and talk this over with Abby, it needs to go into 3 chapters: journalism, the White House years, and then the women's movement. So that was, an early part of the discussion, was the overall structure.
A 3-act structure for any documentary is really good. So we sort of started with that, and that really helped us.
Yeah. So how long did it take from we need to make a documentary to, here we are, it's going to be released? How long did that process take you?
Well, roughly 3 years. I mean, we, at the beginning, I was searching for more stuff, trying to put together some things. I mean, so it was like maybe the takeoff was on the slower end, but then it was 2 years of really hard work.
Yeah, and you had probably done previous research, a lot of research before that. So,
well, I'd done going through all these papers, and as I said.
And so, Abby, what is your process then? Once you start, what happens next? What was your process?
Well, I mean, the first process was you have to raise some money, and Christy really knew where the bodies were buried in terms of people who wanted to support this film. That was, this film could not have been made without Christy's personal contacts. Often I know where the bodies are buried for money. I didn't know it in this film. And, Liz's friends, people who knew her, friends of Christy's, etc.
Yeah. And my childhood friends really came through at the beginning. First Abby says, we got to make a sizzle reel, and so I called a childhood friend of mine, and she said, how much you need? I told her, and she said, you got it. And, and another friend came through with the largest single donation we got. Very quickly, right at the beginning. So that really helped us get off the ground.
And what fundraising arm did you use?
What do you mean fundraising arm?
So if people were donating, where were they donating?
Oh, they were okay, well, we had 2 things, but I mean, my films are all sponsored by a nonprofit, happened to be called Kovno Communications, and much of that early money, you donate to Kovno. Kovno takes a certain percentage for being the nonprofit sponsor, and then we get the money, and we just start spending it.
I see.
I would say every dime we received was charitable, one way or another, because we had 3
every dime
sponsors.
Yeah.
We had Kovno, we had Austin PBS, and we had Tamak.
Well, what is now East Texas A&M University was the historian, a woman historian who is the American history historian more broadly, Jessica Brannon-Ranowski. I was talking to her from the get-go about the film as she became an associate producer, and she pulled in her university to help us in a wide variety of ways, including acting as a fiscal sponsor for foundations.
And so then how big was your budget for this?
A little over $500,000.
Yeah. And then, so, ultimately most of that, when you're dividing up your budget, Abby, do you budget is it for archival? What is the biggest chunk of your budget when you're making?
For shooting. I mean, so there were X number of shooting days where you had to have a, director of photography, a sound engineer, and sometimes a production assistant. So I don't remember exactly how many days we had, but let's say we had 10 days and you figure out what a per day rate is. So say it's, 3,000 a day. One other thing I think it's worth noting here is that basically Christy and I donated our time. So the reason we raised, let's say $500,000+, but there's, somewhere between $150,000 to $200,000 of donated time, given that we had not been paid throughout the course of making this film. I mean, that this ended up being a labor of love from us. If we had had to wait to pay ourselves, this film would have been delayed a much longer time. Yeah. So it was worth it to both of us to let's just get this puppy done. And we did it. So we volunteered basically huge numbers of hours. I mean, that's not even, I can't even imagine how many.
Yeah.
But it's
immeasurable.
Right.
This is close to an $800,000 film with, somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 worth of donated hours. So
donated
we raised
time,
money that we needed in order to pay every single person who worked for us. And
that's wonderful.
And let me just say one other thing, because we're still paying these bills. The archival costs have gone through the roof. So
I know.
Initially for film festival rights for a year. That was plenty expensive, like over $60,000 or $70,000. And then we had to upgrade each of our rights for public television broadcast. So that doubled it. And so it is, I mean, really you are, as an independent documentary filmmaker, you are raising money to pay NBC, ABC, CNN, and C-SPAN. For the
C-SPAN.
C-SPAN is one of the most expensive. It's truly outrageous. And so that just becomes a cost you cannot get around because you have to pay for the rights. I mean, there's some fair usage stuff we got, but basically we're paying for the rights. And it's, so, that you don't have to pay for the rights to a photo that's from the LBJ library, but you sometimes have to pay to up-res it to get it to look good. So it's like you're ending up, the money is flowing out the door for archival from the time.
Well, and you also have to pay for an archival producer. What are the rates for archival producer these days?
The rate, ours was actually, I would say, I'm going to give you the basic going rate. It's between $50 and $60 an hour. We didn't pay.
Well, and I will tell you, if you're listening to this podcast, a lot of people don't understand the critical role that an archival producer is. A lot of people don't have an archival producer, but your film was heavy archival, and it drove the film. And I really feel like you have to have that archival producer in order to really organize it. Because you also have somebody, a rights and clearance producer or an ARC producer should be able to do, all of that. And we've had an ARC producer on here before that's mentioned, the importance of that. But I'm assuming in your film, it was a critical role.
It was critical. And, somebody to keep track of the ownership of each of these items was, that's just tedious work that takes an expert.
Yeah. And, when you talk about the rights for these films or these archival things, are they in perpetuity once you get them for broadcast, or did you have to?
No.
Yeah.
We couldn't afford it. We got 5 years for the PBS broadcast.
5 years.
I mean,
and then
I just want to say, if you're paying, say, another $50 for 5 years, if you want them in perpetuity, you're probably paying closer to $100. The perpetuity thing doubles the cost, and we just weren't in a position to do that.
Right. And then you had music. You had music. The sound for
Yeah.
me is really difficult because it's hard to track down who owns things. Once you track them down, you've got syncing and you've got publishing. And then talk to me about that. Was that just as challenging?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult and challenging, no question. And we did have a composer, an in-house composer for the film as well, to fill in holes. But there were certain pieces of music that we really wanted, like when Liz Comes to Washington, and we really wanted Duke Ellington's "String of Pearls," and
Glenn
we
Miller.
wanted "It's Your
Glenn Miller.
Thing," the Isley. Pardon me?
She
Oh,
said
Glenn Miller. Oh, excuse me. I misspoke. Thank you for correcting me. Glenn Miller. um, and we wanted it, the Brothers, It's Your Thing. These were ideas that our first editor, Eli Olson, had those pieces of music, and they were so perfect. We just couldn't part with them.
Well, and then you
So,
had on the, Ladybird's train whistle train tour
yes.
stop.
Ooh.
There were the LBJ individual songs, right?
Yeah, there
I'd
was
never
a
heard those.
Jerry Herman of Hello Dolly wrote Hello Lyndon, and
Mhm.
we used that, and we used some some music that was
But we
very train like. My voice that sounded a lot like Johnny Cash wasn't Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash wouldn't license. I mean, not that he's alive. His estate wouldn't license it. So, anyway,
so yeah. But the answer is all that takes time, effort, and then we had a separate music rights archival producer who was very helpful as well. So it's
yeah,
you need experts for this. This is not something that two neophytes can just sort of get started and start doing. No,
Right.
we need people who know what they're doing and know how to deal with the different licenses and know how to beg for cheaper rates and most favored nation status and all this stuff that I don't even know what it
Right.
means. Yeah. So
Right.
we
And
need
I
a
would
lot of
say, this needs to be considered in pre-production. A lot of people, don't think about that in pre-production. But I think, if you're doing a documentary film and you're going to have archival, you need to include the ARC producers, the music ARC producers in the beginning. You need to include their fees in the beginning. You need to involve them before you ever begin. And when you're laying out the story, you need to know from them, how much time is this going to take? Where do you think you can get these things? Et cetera, et cetera. Do you agree with that?
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, and
No, factor it into your budget and your plan.
there are things you may not be able to get. I mean, music is very
Yeah.
Yeah.
flighty. I mean, there are a lot of people that don't want you to use their music for reasons that I've never understood
Mhm.
since we're offering to pay. But so just because you love something and actually have budgeted for it doesn't mean you get to use it. I mean, there are a lot of hoops you have to jump through to make sure you can use it. And I've been told no on numerous pieces of music. Just like no, we're not
Mm.
licensed.
So talk to me about the places where you go to get where did you go to get your archival for this? Your music, your photos, your
Oh,
videos?
just dozens and dozens of sources. It's not one place.
And
I mean, the
Such
archival
as?
producer.
we didn't go to the National Archives, as it turned out. I mean, because we knew, it's like various archives had a lot of the material. I think it was ABC that had most of the whistle stuff.
Yeah.
The presidential libraries were helpful to us. Their presidential libraries they at least have the pictures of the presidents. So when we needed some stuff of Johnson or Lady Bird, that was, LBJ Library was quite helpful. And that's public domain if you can find what you need.
Well,
Some of it.
yeah. They have all the White House photography, but other things they have, we did have to pay for licenses because they have stuff that is not public domain as well.
Right.
So, but they were very helpful, the LBJ Library. I had a relationship with them, and I had, doing all the archival research, going through my mom's papers, and so they were very helpful.
Well,
Yeah. So, I mean, just to answer this, it's like whoever your archival producer is, and again, Suzanne Mason, who was our archival producer, had a head start because Christy would say, "I think my mother was on X show on this date on this station." That really helped. Or we knew she was on David Frost. Great. Well, it turns out there isn't like a station that has the David Frost material. You have to go to some backup archive called Reelin' in the Years.
Right.
But we were able to do that. So it's like either we knew there was a specific piece that we wanted, or we knew there were, interviews on C-SPAN. I mean, we had a pretty good head start. But because the stuff was spread so wide, you really had to have a relationship with each one of the major networks and each one of the major archives. And it took a lot of time and a lot of patience from our archival producer to get what we needed. And we got help from Chrissy, you have to tell her the name because I can't remember it. The people who did the story of the National Women's Conference. There was a video producer.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I don't remember their name, but there was a couple that did a documentary on the National Women's Conference that was a very important historic conference in 1977, and they had done that documentary, and so we were grateful to get a hold of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, I was just so impressed with all of this archival. The other thing that was interesting to me in the way that you used it, you used newspaper clippings. I loved this was a technique that you used often where it was archival newspapers, and there were a lot of them in there. So it was photos of newspapers. And sometimes you would use the newspapers where there would be clip outs of the newspapers, but you would use either videos or photos with the headlines in them. I thought that was a very creative use of, using the newspapers as well as, putting photos of the time or photos of what was going on.
Video images that come to life. They bring the story to life, the headline to life.
I thought that was fascinating. So speaking of the story, let's just jump right into that because I thought that was masterful storytelling. So talk to me about how the story was woven together. Did you write it out and then piece it together? Did the story come together in the edit? Who was, driving the story?
Well, I would usually put together the story points for the editor. That would be, these are the key things. When you talk about her journalism career, here are the key things. And then where I knew that there was video that matched up with a particular one of those points, I would tell her. And then she was brilliant, and she, did her magic. And would show Abby and me things, the product, and we, make comments, get back to her, that was essentially it. We had a second editor who was also very good, and Ken Snyder, and so they both serially, one was there at the beginning, one was there at the end. Really worked closely with us to weave it all together.
All right. Well, I want to talk a little bit more about story. I have a lot more questions. But what I'd like to do right now, we're going to break this up into 2 episodes, actually, because I have so many more questions. And you guys are amazing to talk to. I think we have a lot to learn from you. So if you don't mind, I'd like to invite you to come back to a second episode. Would that be all right with you?
That'd be great.
Wonderful. All right. Well, what I'd like to do is stop right now, invite you to do our favorite segment, which is DocuView Deja Vu. Now, in this segment, I would like everybody to come with a documentary to recommend. And I'm sure that's not going to be hard because, of course, Abby has made a bunch. So I know that she, has some I'm sure she's a documentary watcher, but may have some on her own. And Christy, I'm sure that's true for you too. So who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Well, because I'll probably be shorter on this subject than Abby, who's got a wealth of documentaries she's seen in her life. I'm not in the business, but so I watch them, but not as often as she does. Anyway, I'm a real history buff. So I love things like American Experience. And one I'd particularly like to recommend is a documentary that they aired in around 2020 called The Vote, again, with the centennial of the 19th Amendment. And it was written and directed by a woman named Michelle Ferrari. And it is the story of the last chapter of getting the 19th Amendment ratified and part of the Constitution. So overall, it took 75 years and 3 generations of women working to get the 19th Amendment. And it then just squeaked by one vote in the Tennessee legislature, finally in 2020. And it is a story full of colorful characters. The women like Alice Paul and Carrie Cat Chapman and so forth, who were represented, a lot of women who represented different strategies, different tactics, but it took it all coming together to get it over the finish line. And it's just beautifully told. It's told in 2 episodes, each 2 hours. You can get it on PBS Passport. And so I highly recommend it to people.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you very much for that recommendation. I can't wait to watch that one. All right, Abby, you're up.
Okay, I'll save my own personal one, the one that I'm pitching besides Liz Carpenter, for last. There are 2 films that are nominated for Academy Awards this year, and I would be happy if either one of them won. So I want to pitch those 2. One is Porcelain War, which is about people in it's an amazing film done by a U.S. filmmaker and a Ukrainian filmmaker. And it is really the story of people who make porcelain characters in Ukraine while this war is going on. So you learn a lot about life in Ukraine. You learn a lot about, the art and craft of porcelain art. And it's just a really well done and moving. And I say all this having not in the context of how we're about to abandon Ukraine, but just to say that this is a beautiful film, very artistic and very contemporary. And I'm not sure actually what platform it's on, but I know that it is in contention. So within the next week or 2, it's either going to win the Academy Award or not. And one way or another, it will be streaming soon. But it's an absolutely beautiful film. And the other film
wonderful
for an award, which is also incredibly contemporary, much harder to watch, although Porcelain War has moments that are very difficult, is a film called No Other Land. And it is the story of a town I want to say in the West Bank, I'm pretty sure it's in the West Bank, where Israeli and Palestinian filmmakers come together to tell the story of, the consistent destruction of this town where the Arab/Palestinian filmmaker lives. And it's an attempt to show cooperation, collaboration, and the tension that these people are living under daily. And it's an amazing kind of verite film about events that are going on constantly, and we're reading about it in the newspaper, and this is a way of meeting the individuals, whose lives are so impacted by it. So, and I don't know, it made me cry many times. So that's another one that's also up for an Academy Award. It has not found U.S. distribution because it's such a hot potato, but I believe it will at some point. So those are my 2.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing those with us. We probably would not have heard of them otherwise. So thank you so much for sharing those with us. Ladies, it has been such a pleasure to talk with you, and I'm so glad you're going to come back. We have so much more to talk about. I thank you, and I congratulate you on this film. It is going to be airing on PBS, and we're going to talk about that in our next episode. A lot of people want to know how in the world you get a film on PBS. Is that a good thing? Is that a challenging thing? So we want to learn more about that. I want to dive more into the story, really. I want to ask you about how you balance the portrait of Liz Carpenter with the politics of Liz Carpenter, because I think you did that extremely well. And we're going to get into, more about, the editing and just wrangling the story. I just think you did a magical job of that. So thank you, everybody, for listening to Documentary First, where we believe everybody has a story to tell, and you can be the one to tell it. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.